The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the bustling St. Carlos research lab. Rows of lab coats scurried amongst whirring machines and flickering computer monitors, the air thick with the thrum of scientific endeavor. At the center of the controlled chaos stood Mr. Vernon Blackwood, the lab's manager. His face, etched with lines of worry and ambition, was a mask of steely resolve. "Faster," he boomed, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "We're on a tight deadline. We need to complete this research before." His booming voice was cut short by a hurried approach from his assistant Bill. Bill's usually calm demeanor was replaced by a flicker of nervous energy. "Mr. Blackwood," he panted, "we've almost breached the anomaly threshold. We're on the verge of a 4D space incursion within the lab, but what, Bill?" Blackwood snapped, his frustration palpable. "We need Dr. Selvic. His expertise is crucial for stabilizing the anomaly once we breach it." Blackwood's brow furrowed. "Where is Selvic? Doesn't he know the importance of this project?" "He hasn't shown up yet, sir," Bill stammered. Blackwood's face hardened. "If he doesn't show up today, Bill, consider him fired. We can't afford delays, not now." With a scowl, Blackwood turned his back on Bill and stalked towards a group of technicians huddled around a complex machine. His sharp voice cut through the lab once more, barking orders and demanding updates. The technicians scattered, their hurried movements a testament to the pressure he exerted. Meanwhile, Bill watched the scene unfold with a worried frown. The pressure was mounting, and the absence of Dr. Selvic, their resident anomaly expert, cast a long shadow over the lab's precarious success. Dr. Selvic, a whirlwind of disheveled hair and lab coat flapping behind him, tore through the sterile corridors of St. Carlos like a man possessed. Every fiber of his being was focused on a single goal: reaching his lab before the proverbial you-know-what hit the fan. He cleared tables in a single acrobatic leap, the startled shouts of a paperwork-laden technician, a mere blip in his frantic dash. A chair, unfortunately in the wrong place at the wrong time, met its demise with a resounding crack as he barreled past. Suddenly, a collision sent him sprawling. He'd plowed into a bewildered lab worker carrying a stack of beakers. "Whoa. Watch it, mate. You could have knocked the whole experiment over." The worker sputtered, his voice laced with a healthy dose of annoyance. Selvic, already scrambling to his feet, didn't break stride. "Sorry, mate. Don't have time to listen to your expletive deleted." He threw over his shoulder, the last word morphing into a muffled apology as he disappeared around the corner. The worker stared after him, mouth agape, the beakers forgotten in his hand. A slow realization dawned on him. "Wait a minute, wasn't that Dr. Selvic?" he muttered, the weight of that realization settling in his gut. Selvic, meanwhile, burst into his lab, panting heavily. He knew Mr. Blackwood's notoriously short temper, and the thought of facing the brunt of it sent a shiver down his spine. Relief washed over Dr. Selvic as his eyes landed on the familiar doorknob of his lab. Just as he reached for it, a flash of vibrant pink caught his attention. Jennifer, a co-lab attendant from another department, stood by the water cooler, a radiant smile lighting up her face. Her lab coat, usually pristine, was adorned with a cartoon cat peeking out of the pocket, a stark contrast to the sterile environment. "Hey Selvic. So much in a hurry?" she chirped, a playful glint in her eyes. "Guess you're running late again." Selvic froze, his hand hovering awkwardly near the doorknob. Oh, hi Jennifer," he stammered, cheeks flushing a faint pink. You look beautiful today." Jennifer's smile widened, a melodic chuckle escaping her lips. "Aw, thanks, my cutie pie," she teased, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. Selvic's blush deepened, the compliment sending a jolt through him. Oh, come on, I'm not as cute as you are," he mumbled, fumbling for words. Jennifer's laughter filled the sterile hallway, a welcome break from the usual lab tension. Just then, a harsh voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention all personnel. We need Dr. Selvic in the beer research facility ASAP." The playful atmosphere vanished instantly. Jennifer's smile softened. "Looks like they need you, Dr. Selvic. See you later, cutie pie." She winked before sauntering away. Selvic chuckled sheepishly, the playful interaction momentarily pushing his worries aside. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, a slight smile lingering on his lips. With a renewed sense of urgency, he turned and headed towards the beer research facility, its entrance just a few corridors away. The weight of Mr. Blackwood's impending wrath settled back on his shoulders, but a flicker of hope, sparked by Jennifer's words, flickered within him. Dr. Selvic skidded to a halt before the imposing doors of the beer research facility. Taking a deep breath, he channeled his inner hero and kicked the doors open with a resounding bang. He burst into the lab, arms outstretched, a triumphant cry escaping his lips. "I am here, Selvic. Finally at your service." The lab fell silent. Head swiveled, eyes widening in a mix of surprise and amusement. Technicians froze mid-task, their gazes fixed on Selvic's dramatic entrance. The silence stretched, broken only by Selvic's labored breathing. His heroic pose slowly deflated as he realized the effect his grand entrance had produced. Then, a voice boomed from across the room, shattering the awkward tableau. "Selvic. Why are you late again?" Mr. Vernon Blackwood bellowed, his face contorted in fury. "Do you think this lab is your home? You can waltz in whenever you please, huh?" Selvic's face flushed crimson. The playful confidence from the hallway had replaced by a sinking feeling of dread. I'm sorry, sir," he stammered, his voice barely a squeak. "Just some traffic." Blackwood's scowl deepened. "All right, Selvic. Since you've finally graced us with your presence, I need you to complete the 4D anomaly research by today. We don't have much time left." Bill, the ever-present assistant, stepped forward. "All right everyone," he announced in a strained voice, "let's get back to work, shall we?" With a final glare at Selvic, Mr. Blackwood stormed out of the lab, his booming footsteps echoing down the corridor. Selvic stood there, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The humiliation stung worse than any traffic jam ever could. He mumbled another apology, more to himself than anyone else. A ripple of suppressed laughter went around the lab. Selvic winced as his co-workers exchanged knowing glances, their amusement evident. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Right, then," he said, his voice shaky. "Shall we get to work?" The laughter died down, replaced by the familiar hum of the lab equipment. Selvic, his heroic dreams shattered, joined his team, the weight of Mr. Blackwood's threat and the mocking whispers hanging heavy in the air. Ignoring the snickers from his earlier entrance, Dr. Selvic settled into his cluttered desk at the far corner of the lab. Mr. Blackwood's threat hung heavy in the air, pushing aside any lingering embarrassment. He had more important things to worry about. He wasn't there to complete official research, not entirely. Tucked beneath a pile of lab reports lay his real project. A makeshift magnetic pulse gun. It was a passion project, a clandestine endeavor he'd been working on in his spare time. With practiced movements, Selvic unscrewed the casing, revealing a tangle of wires and capacitors, the heart of his creation. Minutes ticked by as he meticulously tightened a loose screw, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Finally finished tinkering with your little toy, Selvic." The voice startled him out of his concentration. He looked up to see his friend and confidant, Jake, leaning against the desk, a playful grin on his face. "Yeah, mate," Selvic chuckled, carefully reattaching the casing. "It was a bit of a struggle, but I always managed to cobble something together." "Nice work," Jake said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "So, how does this bad boy work?" Selvic's chest puffed with pride. "Let me demonstrate," he declared, grabbing the completed gun. He stood up, aiming the device at a nearby apple sitting on a lab technician's desk. With a click and a hum, the gun fired. A visible pulse of energy crackled from the barrel, bathing the apple in a blue glow. The apple, defying gravity, lifted off the surface, bobbing like a miniature moon in midair. "Whoa!" Jake exclaimed, his eyes wide with amazement. "That's actually pretty sweet." Selvic grinned. "The magnetic field disrupts the gravitational pull," he explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "We can potentially control the field's strength and direction." His sentence was cut short by a sudden, uncontrollable sneeze. The unexpected jolt sent a tremor through his hand, causing the gun to wobble. The controlled magnetic field went haywire. The levitating apple, caught in the erratic field, shot off like a tiny projectile. It soared across the lab in a haphazard arc, defying all laws of physics. And with a resounding thwack, the apple found its target. Mr. Vernon Blackwood, who had just re-entered the lab, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding in the corner. The apple connected squarely with Mr. Blackwood's forehead, sending a spray of juice flying and eliciting a yelp of surprise. The impact knocked the apple to the floor, where it rolled away innocently. Silence descended upon the lab. Selvic stared at the fallen apple, his blood running cold. He slowly lowered the gun, bracing himself for the inevitable. Mr. Blackwood, red-faced and thoroughly stunned, slowly turned toward Selvic. The air crackled with anticipation. The tension in the room was thicker than the spilled apple juice. The silence stretched, broken only by the dripping of apple juice onto the sterile lab floor. Selvic stood frozen, the weight of Mr. Blackwood's imminent wrath pressing down on him. Finally, Blackwood exploded. "Enough of this nonsense, Selvic," he roared, his voice echoing in the tense atmosphere. "I've told you 100 times not to make these stupid inventions in my lab. But you never listen, do you?" Selvic flinched, a wave of shame washing over him. I'm sorry, sir," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "But this is actually a very fine invention. A magnetic pulse gun. It can." Blackwood cut him off, his nostrils flaring in anger. "A magnetic pulse gun? Selvic, you know what? You're utterly useless to this lab. Your head is always in the clouds, tinkering with these worthless toys. You're a liability." Selvic felt a cold dread grip his heart. The humiliation burned hotter than the sting of the harsh words. He stood speechless, his mind reeling from the attack. Blackwood snatched the magnetic pulse gun from Selvic's limp grasp, his movements fueled by fury. "This," he spat, holding up the gun, "is your last warning. Behave yourself, Selvic. Stop wasting your time on these useless things and get back to work you were actually hired to do." Selvic could only nod meekly, his dreams of a groundbreaking invention crushed under the weight of Mr. Blackwood's disdain. "Farewell, now," Blackwood barked, his voice laced with disgust. He stormed off towards his office, leaving Selvic standing alone amidst the wreckage of his creation and his self-esteem. As Blackwood retreated, a muffled grumble reached Selvic's ears. "Don't even know why I hired this pathetic fool in the first place." The words hung in the air, a cruel echo of Blackwood's true feelings. Selvic slumped back onto his chair, defeated. A single tear rolled down his cheek, landing with a plop on the cold metal desk. He was a brilliant scientist, he knew it. But in Mr. Blackwood's eyes, he was nothing more than a bumbling fool, a constant disappointment. The once vibrant lab now seemed to radiate an oppressive energy. The playful banter with Jake felt like a distant memory. Selvic stared at the empty space where his creation once lay, the weight of Mr. Blackwood's words a heavy burden on his shoulders. He had to prove him wrong. He had to show Mr. Blackwood and everyone else the potential that lay within him. But the question remained how. Selvic remained slumped in his chair, staring dejectedly at the spot where his magnetic pulse gun once lay. A defeated sigh escaped his lips. "Maybe Mr. Blackwood's right," he mumbled, his voice thick with despair. "Maybe I am useless." The hand landed on his shoulder, jolting him out of his self-pity. He looked up to see Jake, his friend's face etched with concern. "No, Selvic, don't say that," Jake said firmly. "I know Mr. Blackwood can be a massive well, you know. But don't let his words define you." Selvic managed a faint, unconvincing smile. "Do you really think so, Jake? Am I even worthy of being called a scientist?" A determined glint flickered in Jake's eyes. "Absolutely, Selvic. Don't you worry, mate. You're one of the most brilliant minds I know. Don't lose hope." Selvic felt a flicker of warmth spread through him. Jake's unwavering belief was a much-needed lifeline in the storm of doubt. "Thanks, Jake," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "I really needed that." Jake grinned. "All right, enough of this moping," he said, clapping Selvic on the back. "Let's get back to the official research, shall we? You can always tinker with your invention later." Selvic stood up, his shoulders regaining a hint of their usual confident posture. Maybe Mr. Blackwood could keep his negativity. He had Jake, and he had his passion for science. That was all he needed. He reached for a bright yellow hazmat suit hanging by his desk. "Right," he agreed, a newfound determination in his voice. "Time to get to work." As Selvic donned the suit and joined his colleagues, a silent vow formed within him. He would prove Mr. Blackwood wrong. He would create something groundbreaking, something that would leave everyone speechless. And maybe, just maybe, Mr. Blackwood would finally see him for what he truly was. A scientist with a brilliant mind and a passion that wouldn't be extinguished by a few harsh words. Selvic, clad in his bright yellow hazmat suit, joined his team gathered around the imposing quantum pulse generator. The machine, a marvel of modern engineering, hummed with anticipation. "All right, team," Selvic announced, a hint of his usual confidence returning to his voice. "Let's start the sequence." His co-workers, a mix of seasoned veterans and eager newcomers, nodded in agreement. With practiced efficiency, they began the activation protocol. The low hum of the machine intensified, growing into a deep rhythmic thrumming. Lights flickered across the control panels, a ballet of color and code. Suddenly, a vibrant blue light erupted from the heart of the machine. It pulsed with a mesmerizing rhythm, swirling and coalescing into a small, unstable core that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "We're monitoring the stability," a technician called out, her voice tight with excitement. "Readings are fluctuating, but holding in there a new dimensional signature. We've breached the threshold." A collective gasp rippled through the team. Selvic's eyes gleamed. They were on the cusp of a breakthrough, a step closer to unlocking the secrets of the fourth dimension. "Wonderful!" Selvic exclaimed, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "We're so close to accessing another dimension of anomaly. This is a game changer, team. If we succeed, our research will reach a whole new level." His co-workers, faces alight with shared passion, voiced their agreement. "Brilliant work, Selvic," one of them declared. "Honestly, we couldn't have gotten this far without you." Selvic chuckled, a genuine laugh that warmed the sterile lab environment. "Oh, come on, it's all teamwork, guys. None of us could have achieved this alone." Despite his earlier dejection, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. They were making progress, pushing the boundaries of scientific exploration. Mr. Blackwood's harsh words seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the thrill of discovery and the respect of his peers. The team continued their work, their movements precise and coordinated. The blue core in the heart of the machine pulsed with an otherworldly energy, a beacon beckoning them towards the unknown. Selvic, radiating a newfound confidence, surveyed the control room. The blue anomaly core thrummed steadily, a testament to their successful breakthrough. "All right, team," he announced, "stability's holding. Keep it up." Suddenly, a high-pitched squeaking pierced the focused silence. A blur of brown fur shot across the lab floor, sending a lab worker scrambling. A small curious mouse had found its way into the restricted area. Most ignored the furry intruder, their attention glued to the mesmerizing light emanating from the machine. However, one technician, a woman with a pronounced aversion to rodents, shrieked, "A mouse! There's a mouse!" The startled rodent, momentarily distracted, darted towards a nearby table. In its panicked haste, it collided with a vital piece of equipment, the particle emitter. With a sickening clang, the emitter toppled over, its delicate components crashing against the metallic floor. A collective gasp echoed through the room as everyone witnessed the disaster unfold. Selvic, oblivious to the furry culprit, turned towards the technicians, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of annoyance. "The stability," a technician cried, her voice trembling. "It's not even anymore. The readings are spiking, and the core it's overheating." Panic began to gnaw at the edges of Selvic's newfound confidence. How could this have happened? They were moments away from a historic breakthrough, and now everything was teetering on the brink of disaster. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with urgency. The technician pointed a shaky finger towards the fallen emitter, a silent accusation hanging in the air. Selvic's gaze followed her gesture, and his eyes widened in horror as he realized the source of their predicament. The one stable blue core in the machine writhed and pulsed erratically. The comforting hum had morphed into a menacing growl, a warning of impending chaos. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the lab temperature rising with each passing second. The technicians, faces etched with fear, looked to Selvic for guidance. The chaos caused by a tiny mouse had turned their moment of triumph into a desperate scramble for a solution. Dr. Kolsky. Selvic barked, his voice laced with a desperate urgency. First, set off the alarm. We need to evacuate the lab. Dr. Kolsky, a veteran technician with a cool head under pressure, didn't need to be told twice. With practiced movements, he slammed his hand down on the emergency alarm button. A piercing wail filled the lab, shattering the tense silence. The once focused atmosphere erupted into controlled chaos. Technicians scrambled for their designated emergency exits, shouts and instructions filling the air. The alarm echoed throughout the research facility, a stark warning of impending danger. In his office, several floors above, Mr. Vernon Blackwood jolted upright in his chair as the alarm blared. His face contorted in a mix of annoyance and apprehension. He barked into his intercom, his voice booming through the facility speakers. "Bill, what's the meaning of this?" His assistant's voice, strained and breathless, crackled back through the intercom. "Emergency in Research B, sir. System malfunction, overheating core." Blackwood's face flushed crimson. "Selvic," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. Now what has that bumbling fool done this time? He couldn't hide the worry creeping into his voice. Despite his constant berating, Selvic was a talented scientist and a critical member of the research team. With a deep scowl, Blackwood grabbed his coat and stormed out of his office. He wouldn't let Selvic's recklessness jeopardize the entire project. He had to get down to Research B and see what kind of mess Selvic had gotten them into this time. Meanwhile, back in the lab, Selvic and Dr. Kolsky worked frantically at the control panels. The once vibrant blue core in the machine now pulsed a menacing red, a visual representation of their deteriorating situation. A deafening screech filled the lab as the core destabilized with a blinding flash. The once vibrant blue morphed into a swirling vortex of crimson energy, pulsating with an otherworldly power. A tide of pure raw energy surged from the machine, creating a high-intensity quantum magnetic field. Everything became a chaotic ballet of destruction. Tools flew from their workbenches, chairs scraped across the floor, papers swirled like autumn leaves in a hurricane. The technicians who hadn't managed to evacuate in time screamed as they were pulled towards the writhing core, their bodies caught in the invisible grip of the magnetic field. Just then, Mr. Vernon Blackwood burst into the lab, his eyes widening in horror at the unfolding scene. The sight of the unstable core and the technicians being dragged towards it was enough to override his anger. "Everyone evacuate this facility," he bellowed, his voice hoarse with urgency. But before anyone could react further, a powerful wave of energy swept through the room, slamming Selvic and Jake against a nearby table with bone-jarring force. The air crackled with raw power, the scent of ozone stinging their nostrils. Selvic, struggling to regain his breath, looked up in terror at the core. The magnetic field had intensified, becoming a swirling vortex of raw energy. It seemed to be feeding on itself, growing in power with each passing second. "Selvic, we need to shut this down," Jake yelled, his voice barely audible over the deafening hum. Selvic shook his head, despair clouding his features. "It's too late, Jake. The emergency shutdown sequence won't work now. The core's gone critical." Another wave of energy pulsed outwards, throwing them both back against the table. This time, the magnetic field seemed to pulsate with a new, horrifying hunger. It was no longer just pulling objects, it was tearing them apart, shredding them into their basic components under the immense pressure. The technicians trapped in the field screamed in a horrifying chorus as their bodies began to disintegrate. The metal lab equipment began to warp and melt, the very fabric of reality warping around the unstable core. Selvic and Jake huddled together, fear paralyzing their limbs. They were trapped, mere observers to the unfolding catastrophe they had inadvertently created. The monstrous core pulsed with a malevolent light, a hungry maw threatening to devour everything in its path. Selvic, his face etched with a desperate resolve, watched as the technicians continued to be ripped apart by the unseen force. He understood the risk, the almost impossible odds. But there was still a chance, a way to save at least one life. "Jake," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the deafening hum. Jake, his face streaked with tears and terror, struggled to understand Selvic's muffled words. "What are you saying, Selvic?" Selvic, with a newfound clarity, knew what he had to do. "This is the only way, Jake," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "This core can be stopped. But it needs a conductor, something for all that energy too." He couldn't finish the sentence. The urgency of the situation wouldn't allow it. Before Jake could react, Selvic reached out and grabbed him with surprising strength. A surge of panic flooded Jake's eyes. "No, Selvic. What are you doing?" he screamed, struggling against Selvic's grip. But Selvic was resolute. With a final heave, he propelled Jake towards the emergency exit, the force of the throw sending Jake tumbling out of the lab chamber. "Get out of here, Jake," Selvic bellowed, his voice hoarse with exertion. Tell everyone it was an accident." The door slammed shut behind Jake, leaving Selvic alone with the monstrous core. Through the reinforced glass window, Jake and the other surviving technicians watched in horror as Selvic turned towards the core, his body a silhouette against the blinding light. "No, Selvic. Get out of there," Jake screamed, his voice echoing in the sterile hallway. But it was too late. The core, sensing a new conductor, unleashed a surge of energy. Selvic, his body contorting under the immense pressure, was yanked towards the swirling vortex. The blinding flash erupted from the chamber, engulfing the entire lab in a searing light. The ground trembled, a deafening roar filling the air. Then, an eerie silence descended. Jake, shielded from the full force of the blast by the emergency door, stumbled back, his ears ringing. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. All that remained of the lab was a smoldering crater, a testament to the destructive power that had been unleashed. Disbelief choked the air. The surviving technicians stood frozen, their faces a mask of shock and terror. They had witnessed the unthinkable, the consequences of scientific ambition gone wrong. Selvic, Jake whispered, tears streaming down his face. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his friend was gone, sacrificed to contain the very force he had strived to control. The crushing darkness. That's all Selvic remembered. Then, a sudden jolt, a rush of energy that sent him tumbling through a vast emptiness. He was alive, somehow. But where was he? He opened his eyes, greeted by an inky blackness that stretched endlessly in all directions. But within the darkness, flickered faint points of light. Not stars, but swirling rifts, 1,000 miniature galaxies swirling with vibrant colors. Each rift pulsed with an otherworldly energy, a gateway to an unknown dimension. Selvic was adrift in a void, hurtling through this celestial tapestry at an unimaginable speed. The experience was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was a lone traveler in a cosmic ocean, a castaway adrift in an endless sea of possibilities. Suddenly, a tremor shook the void. One of the dimensional rifts closest to Selvic glitched, its unstable form warping and distorting. Before he could react, a powerful energy field surged from the rift, engulfing him in its blinding light. A wave of nausea washed over him as he was pulled through the unstable portal. The world spun around him, a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. Then, blessed darkness. When Selvic finally regained consciousness, a harsh fluorescent light assaulted his eyes. He blinked, trying to focus. He was no longer in the void, that much was clear. He sat up, his body throbbing with a dull ache. He was still clad in his yellow hazmat suit, a beacon of familiarity in this strange environment. He found himself in a dimly lit corridor, the walls painted a sickly yellow. The air buzzed with the incessant hum of fluorescent lights. Confusion clouded his mind. Where was he? How did he get here? The last thing he remembered was the core, the sacrifice. His gaze fell on the wall in front of him. Scrawled in a messy hand, a single sentence jumped out at him. Backrooms is a rift. A shiver ran down his spine. Backrooms. Was this some kind of twisted joke? But the cryptic message, coupled with his impossible journey through the rifts, sent a jolt of fear through him. He had escaped the destruction of the lab, that much was clear. But at what cost? Had he traded one nightmare for another? Selvic slowly rose to his feet, his body protesting with every movement. He had a lot to figure out. Where was he? What were these backrooms? And most importantly, was there any way back home?